For many years now, Russ and Craig have had many wide-ranging conversations with folks from all over the gaming world. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, the Lost Chapter.
So I'm in a bit of a quandary, Russ.
Why are you quandary?
I was trying to save the calories for a donut now that we're in Dunkin' Donuts, and instead I had frozen yogurt after dinner.
Well, why would you frozen
I
yogurt?
think I'm just gonna get an iced coffee. I tried. I've been trying to save up for donuts, and I just can't.
Craig,
Are you under some misconception that iced coffee is less calories than a donut?
Mack
Martin!
It's Mack Martin.
We haven't
and
seen
he's
Mack.
bringing his gaming design abilities to my caloric intake. Yes, Mack, I had actually thought that as you spoke. I thought I was being foolish.
Why don't you
I'll take iced coffee and a donut, please.
Get a culotta. Get a frappuccino. That's got no calories in it. You can just eat one of those. Yeah, sure.
Culotta.
Mack,
just state you.
Mack, let me buy you a coffee. What's your favorite donut and coffee here at Dunkin' Donuts? What do you like?
I actually don't drink coffee, but I'll take a donut, and I got to get a bag of coffee for my fiancée anyway. This is the only coffee she'll drink.
Really? She's a Dunk's coffee person.
Taste.
This one is this and 7-Eleven. This is 7-Eleven. Only thing she'll drink.
Really interesting. See, I think most coffee connoisseurs would probably not pick those brands, which is, I'm not saying she's wrong. I'm just saying it's unusual, right?
They are the Hershey's of coffee, and I mean that in the best way. The reason Hershey is so popular is that it's so consistent.
Yes.
It didn't used to be that chocolate was produced so consistently.
Yep, you're right. Very good. Well, Mack, we've been, all of our friends and ourselves, we've been all talking about, we're all, and I know you, last time you were on the show, we talked about this, you're an old school 40k guy, from way back, as are we, and so now 8th edition's coming out. And Craig and I have been talking about it, and is this going to be the thing that brings us back? Now, Mack, have you been religiously playing 40k forever? Did you take a break? I seem to remember you took a break from it for a bit.
I didn't take a break by choice.
Okay.
So much as I realized if I kept playing, I'd never play again.
Why is that? Were you in a dark place? Let's see what I did there. Were you in a grim dark?
Yeah,
place?
I was in a very dark millennium. Yeah, it was. Yeah, the 7th edition did not do what I wanted miniatures games to do.
Uh-huh.
What were the fundamental? Not to get too deep into that, but I think it'll help us to understand what they've changed in 8th, and if that's going to bring people like us back. Where did 7th go from a very high level? Where did 7th go that kind of had you disappointed?
I wanted a game that had some semblance of gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
Some semblance of gameplay. It's hard to describe. There's a difference between gaming and gambling.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
Gambling doesn't require skill. For instance, if you're playing a slot machine, there's no skill to a slot machine. Mm-hmm. That's gambling. Poker, I consider gaming. Now, granted, these are definitions I'm spouting off right now, but there's a difference. And for me, 40K had lost the ability to not be – it was just gambling. It was so focused on who got what objectives and who brought the codex that had happened to get love most recently, which stopped being the most recent codex. I know a lot of people were saying, they're trying to make you buy the new thing. I'm like, often the new thing sucked.
Right, there was a time.
There was no rhyme or reason, and they were coming out so fast, and it's like, can you quit splitting my codex in half and trying to charge me twice as much for half as many rules?
Yeah.
Every time I turned around, I was just getting battered by 7th edition, and thankfully...
Mack, I like that line. That's you just nailed it. What would kind of disenfranchise me with Games Workshop, because it wasn't just 40K, right? Like Uncharted Seas, I was so hopeful for. Not Uncharted Seas. I mean, what was the ship game, Craig? I'm losing it.
That's not Man of War.
No,
it was the board game.
Yeah, the new one.
I was hoping it was going to be Man of War, but it wasn't.
It had that beautiful mat.
Yes,
the mat
was awesome. The ships were awesome. And the game
those
was
wonderful measurers.
And you nailed it, Mac. The game was not gaming; it was gambling. It was total randomness. Like everything was just completely random. And
look, games need randomness. Sometimes you just need enough dice involved so that one player can go, "Hey, the dice went against me," and there's no egos bruised. But for the most part, you need to be able to feel like you're affecting the outcome through your decisions.
Yes, that's great. I've always struggled to express that thing, and I think you really nailed it very concisely. So thank you for saying that, because now I'm going to stay with me.
It's how I feel about current Hearthstone.
about what?
Hearthstone?
Hearthstone currently is the latest patch. I don't feel like I'm playing my opponent. I feel like my opponent is playing his deck and I'm playing mine, and one of us is going to get to the victory sooner, but we're not stopping each other.
Yeah, there's two parts there. So there's the solo game with no player interaction, which is kind of where Hearthstone is. It's not necessarily gambling. It's just there's no player interaction, right? A lot of board games have this problem. But then but is that the same thing as the game is pretty much luck? Because I think there's a subtle difference there, just not to put too fine.
Well, the current Hearthstone is the one problem. Well, all right, not to get too nitty gritty, but the current meta problem I see is the Rogue Quest deck, and that meta problem is different, but it is showcasing a problem with their with their system that includes, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Hearthstone, but it includes a variety of ways to generate cards that go into your hand or deck, and these cards are always procedurally or randomly generated. So it's like Discover will show you 3 options, but they're randomly generated. So because so much of the game is randomly generated right in front of your eyes, and you have to make all these decisions, you never know if you're making the right one. You didn't build your deck in a way that will hopefully interact with the meta and what you're likely to see. You're instead building the deck with as most of these as you can, and hopefully picking the one that will be an answer to something your opponent does in the future.
Got it.
And you just you're playing the odds on each one of those.
Yeah. Well, all right. So that's great. I love talking about that. We could talk about that all day, but we probably should talk about this new 40k thing. So when you, how closely have you been following 8th? Were you so disenfranchised with 7th? You're just like, don't even talk to me about 8th edition, or are you kind of like, were they saying the right things that kind of tickle your fancy there in terms of what was going on?
When I decided it was time for me to take a break, I think it's time for me to take a break until they do something different, not until a new edition. And then 8th was that something different. And I was very happy to see that they very quickly went, hey, it's time for something different too.
Yeah, I got excited when I heard we're redoing all the codexes. That, to me, they needed that reboot.
That was the first step to them doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep. So that was cool. So did you follow it very closely from then? Were you like reading all the preview rules and all the? I mean, Games Workshop did some interesting stuff this time around because they didn't. They leaked on purpose this stuff. They were actually messaging people, getting them excited, getting feedback on it. A lot more open development than they maybe normally do, right? We've
been saying it for years that they should be doing it, and I know there's a lot of the boards and Facebook is like, oh, it's about time. And I'm like, no. Welcome to the table, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us.
Right.
I'm excited to see you here.
Right.
Yeah, I'm stoked that they're putting those things out. I didn't follow them all because they haven't quite hit the penetration levels where it was getting to me as quickly as it should have. Who I follow on Facebook, which is where I get my gaming news these days, every one of those posts didn't come up in my feed, but a lot of them did, and a lot of discussion on them did. So I went and found them when they came out, but I think I missed a couple.
Yeah.
I was following it with interest, and I was really excited to see the book. And this was the first time, period, the first time in my 40K existence that I've been excited enough about the new edition that I'm actually buying this new starter box just for the book.
Nice. Well, the starter box.
Before I would just wait for the hardback to come out.
Well, interestingly, the starter box comes with a hardback and not the little pamphlet rule book, which is.
And I found that out after I made that decision.
Right. I mean, it's the starter box is pricey compared to most other box games, but what you get in there is definitely nice. You're getting what I mean, in all intents and purposes, it's sort of like the collector's edition. It's not really, because there's also a collector's edition that's $400, which is for the hardcore.
Well, there are guys out there who have $400 to drop, and that ain't a thing. And
I think there's at least 2 being bought in our local group.
Take the money. I mean, but I think that
we forget that a lot of 40K players are only 40K players, and they spend a lot of the time building and painting and doing other things. So their hobby dollars all go to 40k.
All one game,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, I'm definitely not that person. But
Yeah, me
so what did you? So now you have, so Craig and I, we mentioned this on last episode. We got Games Workshop was kind enough to send us one of the boxes early, and so we've had a chance to really dive in and take a look at the models and of course the rules and the art and all the changes. And we played. Craig's played several now. I played one game with the starter box, and one of the things I can't wait to get my favorite armies to the table, like the Imperial Guard and the Orcs, but unfortunately we did not get the early copies of the data sheets for all the factions. All we have is the stuff that comes in the box, which is basically for the Nurgle Marines and the Primus Space Marines. Is that right?
Primaris.
Yeah, the taller Space Marines, the Space Marines as they were intended, if you will.
Someone brought up on not to plug, but on when we were talking about it on our podcast, someone brought up that now his orcs just look so short.
Right, we need bigger knobs, more knobs.
Don't say that. Knob has another meaning.
Well, yes, I understand, but yes, larger orcs, Mac, with a K. We need more.
Yes, we need larger orcs.
Which Games Workshop, I'm sure. See, here's the brilliance. This is an aside, 'cause it's nothing to do with the rules. But I thought the Primaris Space Marines were pretty brilliant because they can truthfully and faithfully say, look, all your current Space Marines still work. They're all great. But we've introduced these brand new Space Marines that are even bigger and better. And by the way, you can customize them all for your own chapter, and that all works, and they fit right in. And you can replace all your Marines with these. You don't have to. No need to. Your current ones are fine. They're not as good on the battlefield.
Look, all your shoulder pads, heads, and backpacks from your old kits fit right on in.
They do, sure. So, but that's a smart call, and I can imagine them doing that with all the factions coming out with new core models that are technically different. Other companies have done this too. I think Spartan Games did this with some of their stuff too. With the old ships have different stats than the new ships. But I think it's a great idea, and it's a great way to really level the Marines up without saying. But by making the rules different, they haven't said all your old Marines are dorky looking. They're saying your old Marines are classics, and they have their classic rules, and there's new Marines that are even, more advanced, but they cost more points. So if you want mass Marines, you can get the old ones.
Not to fall back on my salty ways. Sometimes I just prefer that companies bite the bullet. I know that Games Workshop right now I think is a little more nervous about they haven't been in these waters before as a company. So publicly interacting, and so far it's going great for them. So I don't want to push it and scare them away. Right now they're a shy little deer taking a drink from the water. I ain't gonna run up.
Right.
But so I try not to be too salty. But I sometimes would prefer a company just bites the bullet on things like this. I understand they don't want to because they get a lot of kickback.
They would.
I would much rather them just go, yeah, this is the new size we're going to be doing.
Yeah.
The old ones are still legal. Play nuts, but we're going this size, guys.
Yeah.
We think they look cooler. We want to sell more stuff. We are a company. We don't want to make you buy the new thing because it's better. We want you to want to buy the new thing because it looks cool.
Right.
And for me that's fair. Doing the new Marines, they're taller. This is them. They're just the Marines. All of them have the same stats. We're making them taller now. That's fine. That makes me want to buy stuff because I want the cool thing, not because I feel like I have to buy it. I never want to go into the Avengers seeing it because I have to see it to understand the rest of the universe. No, I should be excited to see it.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. So what are you seeing in? So you've played. So Craig and I, you've played one game? I think you mentioned off there that you played 8th edition.
We played one game. We think the number's going to be around 2,000 for what I would call competitive level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're hoping GW comes out and goes, "This is our competitive level." We're going to start tuning it to that. Because with a game like this, you have to tune towards 1 point total because the game operates different at 500 and 5,000.
Right.
Just different units are worth more and less. So I'd like to see them try and tune at 1 point total and allow the other levels to just be their own thing. I think that's going to be around 2,000. So we took 4 different factions and 4 different players. We each grabbed 1,000 points of stuff and tried to see how it all worked. I learned that the Tau still have no problems killing Terminators.
Nice.
Learned that the old-fashioned way.
Great. So how did you like your Tau? Did your Tau play as you would expect them to?
Judging from his tone of voice, I don't think he played Tau.
I was not the Tau.
Against the Tau.
You were the non-Tau player. So
I was the Grey Knight player in this case.
So how did you? Oh, that's right. And you know you're very passionate about your Grey Knights. How did you feel your Grey Knights did? Did they feel like Grey Knights?
Well, my Dread Knights did great against his Riptides. That was really nice. That used to not be the way it worked.
Uh-huh.
And it was really nice to see my Dread Knights get into hand-to-hand. He would fall back, because you can do that in the new rules, shoot at me. I'd take some wounds. I'd get in there and deal some wounds. And we were hitting each other back and forth for a couple turns, watching this fight between a Dread Knight and a Riptide unfold. And I've always felt that was missing from the game. That felt like, and yes, I did end up winning that fight, so I probably came out liking it more than my opponent. But on the same side, his broadsides were tearing my Terminators apart, just shredding them apart. But it happened in a way that felt like we were watching a battle in 40k unfold over turns, rather than I lost this unit here, now my line is crumpling, can I get these guys over here? Like this edition is much better at creating what I call micro narratives, where we see this guy able to take this guy over a couple rounds, and they're starting to lose, so you have time to bring in some help before they die. I don't want to say the game plays slower, but units feel like they die slower now.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's one thing I really enjoyed in Craig and my game. The units didn't just instantly explode in death. They felt like they were whittled down, and you had time to feel sorry for them, right? Or
I think
save
that's
them.
very true of the big units too, that have like 14 wounds.
But one thing I noticed, and Mac, I don't know if you noticed this, but I felt like, so I've only played the starter box size game, right? Because we don't have the other rules,
which has some issues of its own.
Well, but the biggest problem I think is just the low model count. So I think this game is really going to shine at higher unit and model counts. I think it's going to feel a little too simple at lower unit counts. Mac, what's your thoughts on that? What have you experienced so far with that?
Well, I think that's going to be an issue with any game designed to work at this scale.
Right.
The game requires more miniatures than, say, a skirmish game.
Right.
So, yeah, when you only have 20 models on the table in a game designed for 40 or 50, yeah, it's going to feel more simple. It's the same issue with, like, say, Malifaux. If you're playing Malifaux with 3 models on each side, the game is going to feel a lot simpler, maybe a little more bare bones than it's intended to play.
Uh-huh.
That's why when we did Malifaux, we worked so hard to make sure the starter boxes had so much in them.
Right.
And I just don't think they can do that with 40k. There's just too many models. But that's part of the spectacle. That's why we play 40k. We go into it knowing how expensive it is. So, yeah, you're right. I think that's going to be a flaw in the starter box. But don't forget that the starter box isn't made for you and me.
Right.
The starter box in this content is made for the 14-year-old, the 20-year-old, the guy and his buddy who just want to get into a new game.
Yep.
And for them, being eased into it is important. If the starter box were a full war game for you and me, it would be too complicated to work as the product it needs to be.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm really excited to get my guard to the table. I'm a treadhead, so I have lots of tanks, lots of transports. I want to see all that stuff on the table in 8th and see how it feels. One of the things, Mac, and I think as a rules designer, I think we've talked about this before too, is I like consistent mechanics as far as you can get them through your range. So one of the things that's always bothered me about 40k is that in other editions, right, vehicles work different than monstrous creatures, would work different than infantry, and all those things work different in hand-to-hand combat than they did at range, which all work differently unless they had flyers work completely differently, and then there was flyby rules and all these different mini games, I guess, you play, right?
Well, you know where that came from.
Yeah.
This is a game that is very much like the original D&D, and if you remember, even as far as Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, everything had what's called a subsystem.
Right.
And this was the game that gamers back then, when 40k first hit the world, gamers expected realism through subsystems. If you didn't have that, your game was too simple. Right. Now we've moved forward where Magic has reminded us all that the complexity needs to be moved to the units, needs to be moved out of the core system to the interactions.
Right. And
we've kind of, I don't want to say we've evolved, but our market has certainly changed with the times. We are now seeing a different fad and it's great to see 40K once again being kind of on that cusp where, yeah, I wanted to see them bring us down to maybe just 2 dice rolls for every resolution instead of 3.
Right.
But they didn't do that. But at the same time, they got rid of all the subsystems they could.
They did. And
a lot of sacred cows that I thought they would never get rid of like vehicle stuff. I thought that would never change.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny.
That's been one of Russ's things for a very, very, very long time. Is that vehicles being a totally different rule set.
Well, it's funny.
Now we just need the one thing the game's missing, which is the ability for my Dread Knight to throw my Rhino into your Chaos Demon and then have the Grey Knights inside get out of the Rhino to fight you.
Well, so it's interesting because you mentioned something there, Mac, in passing that actually really bothered me in my game versus Craig was playing the Nurgle guys and I was playing the Marines, and I like not too many dice rolls involved to resolve a single action, right? So, and what I noticed about you mentioned the idea.
Every one of those Nurgle guys adds another one.
Well, not only that, not only do they get a save after the save, so there's you're supposed to only, they have this core mechanic which is basically you only get one save. Unless you get special rule. So the Nurgle guys have the invulnerable and then a regular, but then they also have a special rule which lets them save again, but that saves against wounds done. So if your penetration does D3 wounds, they get 3 more saves after that. So you're rolling it's not even. Well, first of all, there's a frustration factor. Like, how many frickin' saves do I got to get through to wound your guy? But then there's a second part where how long is this resolution going to take? So that,
I'm with you 100%. I had a fun that happened to us too. We had decided to go through and play it by the book. We were referencing the book and walking through the steps for our first turns to make sure we didn't do it wrong. Right. And the first thing, like idiots, the first thing Miles shoots, the orcs get to fire first. What's he do? All right, I'm going to fire my bubble gun. First thing we have to do is randomly determine all the friggin' gun stats. It's like, wasn't this supposed to go simpler and smoother? And we just happen to fire the one gun that, randomly rolls everything.
Well, there's still a lot of, and there's definitely, and that's, but what's funny about that is I have mixed feelings about that because that is like classic GW, right? So you mentioned earlier that, it was
just random that was the gun we happened to fire. I have no problem with the mechanic,
right?
But we just had to pick the most complicated gun,
right? And it's a fine line, right? So 7th, as you mentioned earlier, went too far down the gambling road, but Games Workshop traditionally does have a lot of elements of this weapon is randomly effective, right? And they have it random wounds,
especially on the
random,
orcs.
Yeah, and random grenade hits, and everything's a die roll to determine how effective it is this round. And one player could be rolling 1s all day, and the other guy's rolling 6s all day, and his grenades are killing whole units, and your grenades are doing squat. And that just happens.
But that slows way too much. That slows down way too much when you're playing a game the size of 40k.
That's what I worry about, and that's a little bit of what I worry about because on the one hand, I feel like the game is designed for large armies because the core rules are so simple. You want to have that to make it feel complicated. I mean, strategic is the way I should say, not complicated, strategic. Have strategic options. But on the other hand, because there's so many depths of die rolls for a single unit to resolve a single shot, that is counterintuitive to the fact that I'm supposed to be having 20 or 30 units on the table.
What we saw in the larger game that we played is when we got to the bigger numbers, it really wasn't too much of an issue. You might see that with the with the Nurgle Marines. Mm-hmm. We might see that it's slow to play against the Nurgle Marines. But that wasn't too much. Even though we were randomly rolling it, we very quickly just built ourselves a little template with a box for each of the stats, rolled the dice, and the players set them in the box.
Yeah.
I think 8th edition is one of those things that's going to be really good for the cottage industry. All the board, the wood burning and all that cool stuff that you do, the plastics and acrylics. I think there's going to be a lot of cool toys that go with your army to speed things up. But at the same time, I don't think we see too much of that on the table. Unless you're running an entire army of nothing but Plague Marines on foot, and you've done nothing but try and cram as many of those guys on the table as you can, or you're running nothing but bubble guns, I just don't think they seem to have sprinkled it into the armies pretty evenly. So there's no one army that's bogging things down all day. It's usually just once or twice a turn you have to resolve something a little weird, at least one I saw, and hopefully that stays with what it is, that the weird stuff isn't so powerful that everyone wants to keep bringing it and hope they luck out. Mm-hmm. Or if they do, they just kind of screw themselves.
So one of the things I really like is the super simplicity of the core rules, and where 40k gets neat is the just almost infinite variety, right? There's so many different units, and each unit's got its own data sheet, and the data sheet does all cool stuff. Like I loved when Craig showed me first the data sheet for the bloat drone, and the idea that it had battlefield degradation, right? As it took wounds, its stats became less effective. Its movement went down, its attacks went down. That's great. You've played larger games, though. Does referenceability become a problem where each unit is sort of functioning differently? And how hard is it to manage all that information to keep track of everything when you have, a larger number of units?
Easier than 7th edition. I mean, there's fewer rules. Everything works more expectantly. Like anything that comes in from off the board comes in the same way, right? So you never have to wonder how. Like if I'm like, hey, what does that new thing do? My opponent can easily be like, same thing. It's coming on the board. It's in reserve.
Right.
Right. So because that goes so much smoother, I'm not worried about it, especially because armies tend to have enough repetition of concept that once you've figured out how they work, it doesn't feel like you have such a wide variety that they don't all work the same. They still feel like a coherent army, but at the same time, the units can react to the enemy in a different way, right? A truck is different than a group of knob bikers, which I have a wish list. We need to talk about what I hope they'll do, because I got a list of specific mechanics.
Okay, let's do that. Let's go there. So what do you want, Mac? What do you need?
8th edition is such a great core because it allows for some things that I've always wanted to happen. First of all, orc trucks, vehicles in general, the ramp, the ram, anything that makes it hurt people now should just be adding to its strength and number of attacks in melee. I can't wait to see my opponent run his trucks into melee with my Grey Knights. That's exactly what orc trucks should be doing.
Right. That's awesome.
And we've seen that in a lot of the video. One of the things that I've loved that they've been doing, ramping up for the release, is Warhammer TV on Twitch. And they've been live streaming one game a day for the last week and a half, and it's going to culminate on release day on Saturday. Is going to be 24 hours of streaming. And so I will admit that I have been very negligent at work because I've been watching a 40k game every afternoon.
I want to watch that. Yes.
Oh, it's an absolute blast. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of character. They've done a good job. They have not yet repeated any armies. So every day it's 2 new armies. So I've actually seen they haven't done orcs. They're actually building up the big battle that they're going to have on Saturday is going to include orcs.
Oh, wonderful!
I gotta watch that.
But I have seen
right now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, and creepy and effective. I have seen like the Gene Stealer Cult Goliath rock crusher vehicle. There's so much cool stuff that they've invented and added to the game since I last paid any attention.
Yeah.
That I'm like looking at the Adeptus Mechanicus has a whole army. Gene Stealer Cult has a whole army, and the Gene Stealer Cult, they're go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. You're right. Because what's funny about all that is it makes you want to start playing again non-competitively.
Yeah.
Right. Now that we know that I don't have to sit here and rebalance their game so that me and my friend can have a fun time. We're free to just play again.
Right. Hopefully.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they've got this Goliath vehicle, and the backstory of the Gene Stealer cults is they're all from mining unions that have been infiltrated, and so they're all like they're tunneling up out of the earth, and they're like infiltrating in the backfield, and they can get Imperial Guard, or Adeptus Militar, or whatever the new term for the Imperial Guard is. They can get those vehicles, but they can also they have a vehicle of their own. I think they have a limo, but the main vehicle that they have is a mining vehicle, and so you can field it as 2 different versions: a truck or as an actual drilling mining vehicle with all kinds of exactly. It's got all these like rock crushing teeth on the front, and fielding that aspect of it gives it a whole bunch of more attacks. It's more likely to hit in hand to hand, and they're strong and they're higher strength. And so it does exactly what you want the orc vehicles to do. And the game where they fielded it, they ran it into a squad of Marines, and it just this truck chewed through these Marines. It was crazy.
Right? Now the only other thing it needs to be able to do is land on an asteroid heading from Earth and blow it up while Aerosmith does
Eventually,
it.
yeah. You put the nuke in the back. Yep.
Right. Exactly. That's awesome.
You know what else I want to see?
Yeah.
They better, when they get around to doing all the greater demons again, they better make the Berserker get stronger as it takes wounds.
Oh yeah. That'd be awesome.
That's cool.
What if it came in on table strength 6 and you just kind of like don't mess with the Berserker? It'll only get worse.
That would be awesome. Well,
don't shoot it.
That's what's brilliant about their current model, right? So what's neat is they can now go in any direction they want, pretty much. The only thing that makes me a little nervous is I wish they could get a. Here's my wish list. So the other trend in miniature gaming, and I think we'll talk more about this maybe in the next episode, is to move away from this concept of codexes, which Games Workshop pioneered, I know, but like for games like Malifaux and Rune Wars and War Machine and Spartan games, all you need is the card, right? And the card has everything you need. So if GW wants to create a new unit for a new faction tomorrow, they just put the card in the box. And
which they needed, because right now they have to coordinate everything so far in advance. If they come up with a cool idea, if one of their designers whips out an amazing model, it takes them years to be able to insert it into the game.
Yep.
Just because, this guy happened to come up with a really cool Dark Eldar model.
Right.
Well, that's going to sit on the shelf for 9 years until we do it. Like, I know that they tell their guys what to do, but it's nice for them to be able to react quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
And Privateer's gone down a road, and I hope GW does this because they're close with Age of Sigmar, where Privateer now, all of their stuff's digital, and they literally review a unit once per quarter, and they go in and they take a look at that card, and they change the digital card once per quarter, and they do play testing and everything, and they do like a season, like they do like, we're going to do trenchers this month, and they do a whole thing on trenchers, get everybody excited about trenchers, and they do videos about trenchers, and then people all tell them. So what's great about that approach is, if you get into a unit that sucks, right, like Bubble Gun or whatever, you fix it. And if it's all in an app, it's easy to fix and just gets out there. Whenever you load your app, you have the latest version. They've got the app with Age of Sigmar. I know they're working on it for 40K, but if they can get to that point where you can get the culture, that everything you need is on your phone and all your rules are on the phone and everything's right there, you can make those evolutionary changes continually, and the game just gets better and better literally every quarter.
Yeah, it just evolves.
Right. Which I hope they do. And I know there's mixed feelings about the game constantly changing, and some people are like, I don't want it to change so much on me. I get that. But as a casual player, I'd like to load it up and just know what I've got as the latest rules. I don't have to go print out 50 FAQs or whatever version of the card.
Right. Well, every time we played 7th edition, we had 9 freaking books at the table, and only one of them was for my army.
Right. Yeah, so that's a good sign. So I love the datasheet concept. So they're definitely in the right direction, and I'm sure they'll figure it all out to get it in an app. That would be awesome.
That would be great.
What else is on your list, Mac?
Things I hope they'll do?
Yeah.
Well, I hope they bring back a lot of, I hate the word, but I want them to get back into the nitty-gritty of armies. Maybe they're getting away from codexes. Maybe they're going to start approaching, here's an army, here's the codex, but know that those rules will change. Mm-hmm. Like, I wouldn't mind that either. I wouldn't mind paying for the app. Yeah. I'm just hoping that they kind of embrace armies having a unique feel and not being afraid to give them that unique GW treatment, with the reminder that keep it simple, don't put too much randomness or weirdness in one faction. Everybody gets one weirdo thing, but let everything else make sense. And as long as they kind of keep to that and they don't try and push sales with rules, I think they'll get back to being the mainstay of our hobby that they were for so many years.
Yeah, I agree.
We need that anchor.
Yeah, I would agree. Craig, what's on your wish list? Now that you've played quite a few the starter box games, what do you want to see them do?
Well, I want to see them stick to the basics and keep it balanced. Mm-hmm. I like Max said, I don't want things to start going out of whack and new releases being more powerful, or like to have some. I mean, all it takes is 1 or 2 units in an army that that's the must-have. I like seeing a whole bunch of stuff that, depending on which theme you want to take with your army, you're going to take different things, but the path to victory is roughly similar in its difficulty for all the different options that you have. I don't know that I have wish list beyond what, like right now I hope it is what I think it is. That's what I would say. That's my wish. My wish right now is that they stick with what they're doing. Seems like over the last year or so they've really changed their business model, and they've changed the way that they interact with the community, and I would like to see that continue. And they got to a point where they could really do no right, and no matter what they did, it was going to be spun in a negative light, and I think they're digging themselves out of that now, and I would like to see that continue, so that this what they're building here can be what I would like it to be, which is a game that goes back into the rotation for us locally, and we can have fun with it, and it's not going to be, oh, I like this, but I don't like that, and I wish this, and I don't. And,
I want to get back to the place where no local gaming store goes without having 40K on the shelves. To watch LGS's stop carrying 40K hurt so bad.
Yeah.
Like I was like,
hurt
what?
your soul.
Oh, man, really? Like, we'll still order it for you. I'm like, that's not why. Like. Like, that wasn't the problem. Like,
no, they definitely that broke. Well, when I saw it reappear in the online retailers, right, officially, that was when I knew they had turned a corner, because that was when they took them off.
We could have baskets.
Yeah, without baskets.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Shopping carts. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're running a little long here on time, but any final thoughts from each of you before we have to sign off? Because the Dunkin' Donuts guy's giving us the evil eye here. He's going to kick us out in a minute.
I enjoyed my 3 games so far. I've been talking a lot on Twitter over the last day about the game that we had, Russ, and the games prior, because the Chaos has won all 3 of the games that I've been involved with since the starter came out. And I do think I think the Sigmarite Marines, not Sigmarite, the Primaris Marines, they have a much narrower path to victory in the starter box, which I think is undeniable. But at the same time, I think with the right matchups and a little luck in their favor, they've got things. And there are combos that are. I don't think there are really many combos at all on the Nurgle side. There's just like, this guy does this to all people, and the 5+ ignore a wound thing doesn't bother me the way it bothers Russ. I think that's built into the points. I think there are ways to mitigate it by plasma weapons that do 2 wounds, for instance, which would cause each Chaos Space Marine to be taking 2 of those 5+ rolls per hit. And a character the Space Marines have that rerolls 1s, so your chances of melting down are less if he survives, because then it becomes, it's a fluid battlefield, and if the wrong guy dies, then that's what I mean by a much more narrow path. But I don't think, I think upon reflection that the Rune Wars starter box is really weighted against the undead. I don't think that the starter box is as weighted against the Marines for 40K, but I think it is weighted in some fashion, which I think is unfortunate again for starter box, because that's going to be, like you said, Mac, that's for guys who've never played before. They don't have armies. This is going to be their first game. I think you need to really try hard to get your starter box to be a nice balance that, kind of take all comers kind of thing. And so I'm interested in seeing what happens. Like, do we, at launch, everybody's going to be like blowing so far beyond the starter box it's not going to matter at all? Or is it something that needs to be addressed over time? But for the most part, right now, I'm very hopeful. I think most of the things that I've seen that gave me a little pause have either, the vehicles no longer having facings kind of bothered me, and them being able to shoot any weapon in any direction kind of bothered me. And then watching these battles on Warhammer TV, I love it because it's, like you said, Mac, when you said micro narratives, you've got, all of a sudden, everything seems much more dynamic. The battlefield seems much more dynamic. The flyer, is flying along its flight path, and it bombed that guy behind it, and then it strafed this guy in front of it. And so
that narrative they always told us we should be forging became a lot easier to forge.
Exactly. That's what I'm seeing, and I hope that that's what continues to develop on local battlefields.
Cool.
That's me. That's my thoughts. What about you, Russ? Or Mac?
Oh.
Mac, why don't you go next?
You go next, Mac.
Oh, what am I afraid they'll do, or what do I hope?
No. What are your final thoughts for this whole thing goes live on Saturday?
Dear God, I hope this doesn't all turn on me and suddenly become the edition that killed 40k. Man, they are pointing at a mountaintop, and we are making really good progress to it. And I'm terrified that we're just going to hit a fissure and it's all going to go south. Because everything's clipping along great, and I couldn't be happier with 40k right now. Sure, there's some, you hear those things, you're in the car, you hear the engine, you're like, is that, all right, let's watch that. Maybe we need gas, maybe we need a tire, let's watch it. But it sounds like they're willing to fix it and all these things. And so I'm so hopeful. And I hope I don't set the bar too high, because if I did, it's going to ruin this hobby for me. And I'm terrified because they seem to be beating expectations at every step. And I started off with low expectations, and I'm raising them, and they keep beating them. And I'm just like, at some point, you're going to meet my expectations and not beat it. And will I be able to emotionally handle that?
We'll see. I think it's exciting. I think they're doing the right things. My only concern is I'm a little nervous for I'm nervous about strategic options that are no longer on the table, and I really have a pet peeve with true line of sight. I think true line of sight is a bad mechanic for a bunch of reasons. I understand. Part of it might be bitter because I had a situation in 40k back in the day where people modeled their hive tyrants crawling, but because true line of sight.
We just had that huge conversation about new line of sight systems when we talked about miniatures games mechanics with me in that other segment.
Yep, that's right.
That totally came before this one and was recorded before this one in every way.
That's right. So I think I really feel like I'm worried about that, and I'm worried about the removal of
But you love Conflict 47, Russ, and Beyond the Gates of Antares, and both of those are true line of sight.
I do, but I've talked about that when I reviewed those games as well, that I was concerned about that there too. And the other thing I'm concerned about is the loss of flanking. So I'm worried about not having the tactical flanking option when engaging in tank battles, and I'm a treadhead. So what I'm really curious about is if I've got a bunch of Imperial Guard tanks and I'm going up against someone with a bunch of their armor, am I feeling like I'm playing a tank game? Which would involve flanking, or do I feel like it's a lot of dice rolling and gambling? What does it feel like, man?
In our 2,000-point game, my partner was playing with 3 Lehman Russes. Mm-hmm. Every turn, those Lehman Russes were firing and hurting something, and it for once, resolving a Lehman Russ felt like a big cannon was firing and hurting something.
Good.
There was no scatter off, none of that crap. It was a big gun that did a bunch of wounds, and it hit people hard. And it was great to see the battle cannon work well against a vehicle, a squad, or a monstrous creature. It was putting wounds on riptides. It was turning on boys. It was doing everything you'd want a main line tank to do. And for once, that Lehman Russ felt like the backbone of a tank army and not just that thing you take with some infantry with las guns.
That's awesome. I worry. Well, that's great. And I definitely see that the vehicles are going to become feeling good because they can show their weapons in every direction they want. That's great. I'm worried more like, what is the Orcs' tactical option to respond to that? Because a weak unit before can get around back or get to the side or effect change.
Well, you can't not wound it, so they just swarm the bad boy.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
Orc boys is one of the most dangerous things a vehicle can face. There's so many attacks, and they're going to get a 6.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good point. Well, great. Well, Mac, we're about to get kicked out of Dunkin' Donuts, but it was great to run into you here, and we'll see you on the main show here in about a week. And enjoy that.
Yeah, see you then.
Don't forget to buy the bag of coffee for your girlfriend before you leave.
Yeah,
already got it.
That's
right
fiance.
Right
or fiance, my bad. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Better.
It's the Christmas one too. I'm worried because they still have them.
Oh.
But they're delicious. If you haven't had
them fresh,
if you haven't had their Christmas coffee, you're missing out.
Hey, it's vacuum sealed. It's all good.
That's true.
All right, Mac. We'll see you in a week, man.
See you later, Mac.
Later.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.